Uh, so I switch to English. I present you our paper published in Nature with Stefano Zapperi, Constant Varlet, who is here in the room, my PhD student, Cécile Bastidon, Katrina Laporta, and myself. Well, so the title of my presentation today is Epidemiology of the Great Fear. So first I'm going to recall what was the Great Fear and what was the conventional wisdom about the Great Fear. In fact, it concerns a very limited period of time from July 20th to August 6th, 1780. And it consists in what? It consists in the fact that you had one or several rumors, whether founded or unfounded, that mainly took the form of fear-based rumors. First kind of rumor you hear about, it is peasants who are supposedly, in this conventional wisdom, illiterate, who were prone to false rumor and believed hunger-inspired rumors due to injustice and to the fear of hoarding of grain by the nobles or rich peasants who were intended supposedly to starve the population. But you have also some kind of rumor, a little bit different, which concerns this time the possible collusion of nobles with foreign powers, such as England or Austria, to overthrow the new regime that emerged from the revolution. So very few days before, Bastille Day. Okay. And also, troops were reportedly seen massing in woods where the German language was spoken and heard, supposedly. So, for conventional wisdom, I will precise who it concerns mainly, peasants indiscriminately spread their hatred throughout the territory, targeting the nobles and their castles. So, the first question we were confronted with was, does the nature of the fear, whether founded or not, can change the way we can measure and analyze this phenomenon of the Great Fear? And our answer, and I think we are legitimate to say this, our answer is no. Whatever true information, fake news, this is probably the modernity of the topic, we can deal with it as a rumor, and we can assess its propagation through an epidemiology model. So what are the sources we exploit? First, Lefebvre, the book of Lefebvre, 1932, which was later translated in English, but I don't remember exactly the date. So it is Lefebvre is the single existing source we have, public source we have at the global level for the whole territory of France. But what we do, we also found at the micro level a monograph from Claire Ramsay, 1989, which is a second source, a monograph about Soissonnais, in which he details the spreading of rumor at the local level. And he registered 200 cases of great fear in Soissonnais during the time boundaries I mentioned. And he distinguished between news coming from officials. These officials could be postilions or civil servants who arrived, at the arrival of stagecoaches at the post houses. And for the rest, for the other half, it was taking the form, very probably, of fake news. Some news are identified as unknown or non-qualified. So fake news of bandits seen in a field or at the edge of the woods to destroy the crops. So I must say that we managed to replicate our model at the local level, and that this micro-level analysis corroborates our results at the global level. So, regardless of the scale, micro or macro analysis, when we apply to the sole existing data our model, you can see that our model explains the way in which rumors spread, and this allows us to identify and test explanatory variables for their propagation. So we try to answer an unresolved historical question. And this is where, in this slide, I'm going to precise what is conventional wisdom about the Great Fear. So the issue is the following. Was the Great Fear the result of uncontrolled emotions, or was it a rational revolutionary process? So mainly, recently, I would say, you have the book by Elster, 2020, France Before 1789, who defends the view that the Great Fear was a matter of emotions. And the opposite view is mainly developed by Lefebvre in La Grande Peur, 1932. So Elster has a behavioral approach. And in this approach, in this view, the French Revolution, and in particular the Great Fear, is assessed as the result of uncontrolled emotions and actions which are carried by illiterate peasants, and mainly subject to uncontrolled fears. This is what he says. And if you want to have an analysis, a critical analysis of this, you can refer to an article that I wrote last year in Journal of Economic Literature, France After 1789, in which I try to call into question this approach, this behavioral approach of the French Revolution, and I suggest other paths to assess it. So, the Great Fear in Elster's book is presented as a series of illogical action, each actor being subject to cognitive bias. And in the precise case of the Great Fear, it is the belief of brigands invading the countryside, or of nobles who wanted to starve the population, and who locally could deal with the brigands to undermine the achievements of the nascent revolution. And of course, by extension, not limited to the single episode of the Great Fear, but for the whole period of the French Revolution, in this view, in terms of a psychological analysis, the French Revolution is seen as the result of inconsistent actions. So, conversely, Lefebvre, in his book, has a very different view. He recalls first that the Great Fear took place, is a peculiar episode that took place within what we could call the French revolutionary momentum, which starts with the Bastille Day, July 14. Then you've got, in these brackets, you've got the night of August 4, abolition of privilege, and then the end of the Great Fear is situated in August 6, and then August 10, you have the birth of the National Guard. We will see that it is also very important. And ultimately, for Lefebvre, the Great Fear is an episode of this emergent revolution, and it characterizes the collective consciousness of the French people, according to his own terms. And for him, it is the birth of the sentiment national. This is what he says in his book. So you have two competing explanations: the thesis of emotion versus the thesis of a certain form of rationality and a will to move from the Ancien Régime and to create another one. So what we propose in this article is an epidemiological model to try to resolve this issue. And so our purpose was to understand whether it was possible to capture any logic between the spreading of the rumor. This is our goal in this article. And why using precisely an epidemiological model? We see three advantages to this. First, it's very important with regard to economists. We have cities, we have data on cities. We know the cities where the rumor spread. But we do not know the person, the individuals infected who believe in the rumor. So you can see it will be more difficult to build intertemporal model of optimization of whatever you want regarding the single individuals than try to follow the path of the rumor. Okay, so since we have not individuals those who will have a critical view of our article will say, where is the utility functions of people who spread the rumor? Okay, we do not have the names, okay? And we do not know precisely the person. We just know that, for instance, in one case, it is a postilion, or it is, you know, I don't know the word in English, garde champêtre who announces the news, that new news are coming from one place to another. So, but we do not have individuals. So it is in this kind of exercise, due to the nature of the information, I think the best possible explanation we can mobilize, I mean, epidemiological model, to identify the logic of the spreading of the rumor. And we have not individuals, but we have cities. And I think that it is an answer, a first answer to the choice of this methodology in this case, because we will be able to associate some characteristics, socio-economic characteristics, along with the path of the rumor. Second advantage of using epidemiology model, it will permit to assess potential explanatory variables as risk factor of a disease. This is the real advantage of this kind of modeling. So we can import, I would say, our data into the framework of epidemiological model, and the variables tested will be assessed easily as risk factors. This is the contribution of this kind of methodology to our assessment. And then third advantage, of course, logically, consequently, we will be able to reconstruct the possible rationale behind the spread of the Great Fear. So we use an epidemiological model to try to resolve the issue of the nature of the Great Fear. But warnings, I would say, big warning. The fact that we use epidemiology model does not mean, obviously, that the Great Fear was a pandemic and that the revolution, by extension, was a disease, a complete disease, okay? It has to be clear that all of the co-author of this paper believe, I would say, with no surprise, exactly the contrary. Yet, it was not a disease, it was the emergence of a new world and a precise moment of it. So, it's not because we use an epidemiological model that we believe that the French Revolution in general was a pandemic by itself. It is obvious, but it's sometimes necessary to recall some evidence. Okay, we used the tools of the methodology of epidemiological model in order to assess possible explanatory variables of the diffusion as risk factors. And the appropriate modeling for that is epidemiology models. So, the scope and significance of our result. Of course, I cannot speak for all my co-authors, and one is present in this room, and I will start by him, for Constant, who was my PhD student this year, and who had this defense in June, before the paper, before we knew that the paper would be accepted. The important fact of this is first, because it is his first publication is in Nature. So I told to him, you are on the tracks now for what we hope to be a brilliant career. For Stefano, physicist, the ability to reconstruct the speed at which the rumor spread and identify the peak of the pandemic is crucial. For Katrina, pathologist, you see, it's a very, the team is composed of really different personalities and disciplines, and that's probably what made the strength of the paper. The variable literacy appeared to be central to her because when she was at school, in Italy, she heard that the Great Fear, it was taught like that, was the work of illiterate and violent peasants. And in fact, we obtained a strange, maybe, in this view, but I would say extraordinary result that the Great Fear processed along with literacy is positively correlated with literacy, which is in complete contradiction with the results, with the proposals of Elster. and his thesis of emotion. For Cécile, the co-author, the major element is probably the fact that we have been able to demonstrate the importance of the property laws in France. Because we will see, I will show you the map, the rumor spread in regions where there was a necessity of action, maybe violent action, to force the nobles to abandon their rights to their property land and their privilege associated with this. And for me, the fact that Nature has published an article in Climatics and Complexity, I forget to tell you this, but 10 years ago, I launched a team called Climatics and Complexity, which is hosted by the Complex System Institute in Lyon. So it was a kind of, we celebrated after the PhD of Constant, the 10 years anniversary of CAC this year. And during, well, we had a nice gift, a nice present in the form of the acceptance of this paper. But so you see, we see each of us in the article different important aspects. But for each of us, we have the conviction that we have contributed with this paper to quantitatively deciding a crucial but still unresolved point in history. And thanks to a climatic and complexity methodology. And for all of us, it is probably the main contribution of this paper. So first of all, the construction of the object. You have to, alors, we had not decided at the very beginning, but it was, if I remember correctly, an idea of Cécile and Stefano. It would be better to use the original map of France at that time, so the Cassini map of France. So it has been, I think, geolocated by, and you have the reference here. So we use this kind to identify precisely the possible ways that followed the Great Fear. Then it was hard work. We had to identify the Great Fear pathways. And we started from the book of Lefebvre, which is, who compiled manually data of the cities infected, and sometimes indicates the rumor comes from one point to another. So it was very hard work for Constant, who transposed this manual data into geolocated map of Cassini. So we had to identify the origin, so we could build what is represented here. Not only the nodes, the towns, the cities by which the rumor spread, but also the segments between, when we have the information, it comes from there to reach this little town after that. So here I present on the left graph, you have the reconstructed transmission network. The nodes are colored according to the date of starting of the Great Fear. So I'm sorry because I'm not a very technical man. Stefano sent me the dynamic spreading. It's very nice to see, and you can see how diffuse. So it's between 20th of July. 20th of July is in blue. Beginning is in blue. The peak is 28th of July. It is in red, and then at the end it is in yellow. So you can see you have an indication that of the way it follows. It starts blue, become red, and then at the peak it was red, and then yellow at the end, close to the border, and you've got also one point. Okay. And the right graph is the road network of France based on Cassini map. The reconstruct road network along which the fear might have spread. Okay. So here in this slide, you have the spreading of the Great Fear, but you have the cluster decomposition of the transmission networks, where, as you can see, the disconnected clusters have been colored with different colors. Okay, so you can see that, and there is also, you've got a book by Vauvel. I think it is in 19. We mentioned it in the bibliography. He represents, but with with the hand the currents of the Great Fear, and he identifies, as we do from Lefebvre, the fact that there were several origins. What we clearly identify here, so we corroborate what they say, both Lefebvre and this Revel, we identify that you had indeed disconnected networks between them. So you have some region, some valleys, some bassin of spreading of the Great Fear, but all of them were not strictly connected. This is an interesting information. So, methodology. What was the methodology used in this paper? Two types of modeling. First, a series model, so epidemiology model, used to describe the number of infection as a function of time. First thing. And then, in second, we implement also multiple regression used to identify the risk of infection, comparing infected versus non-infected towns without considering time. Okay, so we apply two different methodology. So we will get a quite comprehensive view of the phenomenon. For the first one, so the series model. So it is a typical epidemiological model, not so typical because it's not the typical model is a SEER model where you have susceptible population of susceptible S. It is the people who can be infected but who are not yet infected. I, it is for infected people. Here for us it would be cities where the rumor spreads, and R means recovered. But so standard SEER model, you stop at these three categories. We had a fourth one because it had to improve the forecasting of the model. We observe that sometimes, but it's very you can see it on this graph. Some towns, some small cities, have been reinfected. So it means that they knew the passage of the second wave of rumor at that time. So we have to make the hypothesis that some towns can be reinfected at some time. So this is a classical model, a series model in this case, where you have the parameters, the famous parameters of SEER model. We know that from, of course, the pandemic of COVID. It was largely diffused in also in economic analysis. The three core parameters are beta and alpha, who are who characterize the infection rate for susceptible, respectively susceptible and infected individuals, here cities, and gamma is the recovery rate. So look at that. So you are between 20 of July and the 6th of August, you have a little bit more than 15 days. Okay, so it's very short in time. So here you have reinfected. These points, first infected, not a second time. And here we have the series model we calculate, and you see that it fits perfectly well with the observed data. So this methodology enables us first to characterize what is the add-in value of this methodology, namely infection as a function of time. It is represented here. You can see that this model provides a very good fit of what is observed. Economic spreading. Two more information. So you have so we can provide information about the speed of the rumor. What we find, it's on the graph below. What do you see according to several metrics, effective roads from the Cassini map, etc. We find, I would say, a remarkably plausible figure that the speed was in average of 45 kilometers a year. which is coherent with courses, and you see there is a distribution also. It can go sometimes to 100 kilometers, sometimes even more, but it is, if you use ores that at post relay you change every time, it is possible, but it is, of course, the tail of the distribution. 45 kilometers a day, the speed of the grade field. And we can see also here on the graph above is represented the famous R0, parameter, which is supposed to characterize the depth or the importance of the pandemic. If it is above 1, if it is 1, it means that one individual infected will infect another one. If it is above 1, it is very strong epidemic. If it is less than 1, that it decreases. So it is represented within the interval of remaining days. And what do you see? You see what at the beginning is very, very, very strong, and then it decreases afterwards. And you've got the line of 1, which characterizes the beginning, I would say, of a strong epidemic. Okay. So outcomes. Now I switch to the outcomes, but referring to what I mentioned, the other kind of analysis we implement, multiple regressions, to try to identify the explanatory variables that could be associated with the diffusion of this rumor. So outcomes, I would say, our main outcomes have been lay on the ability to reconstruct a certain form of rationality in the diffusion of the Great Fear through key geographic, demographic, institutional, and socio-economic factors. Alors, in this graph, what is represented? You can see when you have the Great Fear, the post roads are represented with green nodes, okay? Green nodes. And when you have white nodes, it means that it didn't come through a postal relay, okay? So what do you see? You see that mainly the Great Fear followed post roads and relay station, okay? But you can see also that postal roads are depicted as green lines, and so you can see that there is, geographically speaking, a coherence between the distribution of the roads on the one hand and the diffusion of the rumor. The rumor follows the road mainly. This is not a surprise, but it is clearly established here. Then we also wonder whether there were other factors than strictly geographic factors, or geographic, or yes, following the road. Yes, we can say it is geographic. So that's the reason why we envisage other socioeconomic factors in a multiple logistic regression. And we wanted to know whether the other possible factors we had in mind were not simply correlated with the geographical factors. That's why we developed several tests, and one of them was a multiple logistic regression, in order to determine whether by themselves these explanatory variables had a power permitting to explain, or was it simply related, because highly correlated with the geographical variable. So what we find in this multiple logistic regression, it corroborates the previous result. It means that when you observe, these are all the possible candidates of explanation for the diffusion of the Great Fear, except the geographical ones. Okay, so we have population, relative income ratio, percentage of home ownership, literacy rate. We use a political variable, participation. It's the first one we have in Piketty Source, his new book, recently published in by MIT and in French. It's the first we have the rate of participation to the referendum of 1790. Price of wheat, economic variable, increment of wheat price, okay, variation, and something that will end this presentation, institutional variable. It is about allodality. It is the characteristic of the property right in France at that time, and it influence or not. It is the fact. It's the only factor who has a very, very high correlation with geography. Why? Because you will see that the rumour proceeds according to certain property law regime and not others. So there is it's not all through the territory, and I will come back to the graph and map to show you. So from this kind of analysis, we get the conclusion that we can develop this kind of modeling, and we get so it is the table here, we get statistically very robust results. First of it, demographic factor. So all these indicators come from this regression I mentioned, okay, multiple regression including all of this, but I represent it on the map separately, one after one, to give you a precise idea of it. So look at that. In blue, the cities where there were no fear, and in red, where you had fear. Okay? Red, fear, blue, no fear. What do you see? Here we represent, was it statistically significant with regard to the demography of the city? What do we find? We find that the rumour spreads in the most densely populated areas. Statistically, you cannot imagine a better statistical answer. It is a first very important point, because one of the key arguments in the book of Elster is to say that the rumour is propagated by ignorant people with obviously a very low literacy rate. So this kind of result completely invalidates what he says. So first striking result. And we were very happy all together to identify a first, yes?
Just a very quick question. Is there a correlation between low dense part of France and very low level of literacy?
Here?
Yeah, because you said Elster.
Yes. Yes. In fact, it's yes, but I understand the meaning of your remark. You asked me if the density is correlated with literacy. That's what we say. And in my answer, yes, I should have speak only about demography. Literacy is another result that we get. Your question is to know whether literacy is low in low densely populated region. I would say possibly, but since we implement this multiple regression, that we can identify those two as two serious and relevant explanatory variables. So in the same equation, you can have literacy and demography. It's not necessarily fully linked over the whole territory, even if in some cases you can find a link. I think it will depend on the structure. If you have I would say, a desert around one city, in this case of you will not have, the link with between literacy and demography will be different than if you have another distribution of the population around a city less important. Okay. Yes, of course. Yes, of course. Of course. And you have, I hope he's here, my co-author Stefano. I think he could answer and show exactly what you asked for, the matrix correlation. Of course, it was. I present separately the results, but they all provide for a unique multiple regression equation. Okay, and this case has been taken into consideration absolutely. So Rumor spreads in the most densely populated areas. This is the first result we get, and Esther contends that rumor vehiculated obviously by illiterate people could only follow paths of low densely populated areas. So he's wrong, firstly, on this point. Rumor spreads mostly in highly densely populated areas. What about the incidence of economic factors on the spreading of the rumor? We found that we have two indicators here, relative income per person. So you can see that, and we compare two cases, cities where there were the fear didn't come, no, and where it passed through. Okay, what do you see? There is a significant difference according to the income per capita of the cities. It appears that rumor spreads rather in richer cities than in less rich cities. Firstly, then probably even more interestingly, we have still from Piketty data the percentage of ownership in the cities in France in 1 year after. It's the most proximate we had, 1790. No fear, fear. What do we observe? We observe that the fear passed through the cities where wealth was mostly concentrated. So in towns where you had a high concentration of wealth, which means that when you have a high inequality in wealth, then the rumor has many chances to propagate more easily than where it is not the case. And this is perfectly coherent because wealthy people fear for their wealth. They are more concerned by a risk than in region where the level of wealth is lower. Okay, so it is also a coherent result. The result that we get, rumor affects the wealthiest cities where the wealth inequality is most pronounced. It is logical. Third outcome, regarding this time when we focus on the incidence of you said that I told you that the rumor was about the fear of attacking harvest, etc., and grains. We compare the region according to the price of wheat. So blue, it's low. When you go to yellow, it's a high price. What do you observe? Very clearly, the fear propagated mostly where the price of wheat was the highest. So where people fear at the most to fear to lose. Okay. It's another, rational explanation of why this kind of region was more concerned by the great fear than others. The high price of wheat shows that, I would say, in a safety-first analysis, people want to protect their harvest and their wealth coming from grains. So they have a lot to fear from any rumor, supposing that they could be attacked by brigands, etc. So this is logical. The statistical link between this economic aspect and the propagation of the rumor has a rational explanation. Sociological factor. It's very, very, I think, strong and important, this result. Rumor spreads is positively correlated with literacy. What do we use as to identify the variable literacy. It is, I don't remember what was the source of that. I think it is possible, no, I don't remember exactly, but we have and this information is for this period, the information usually used in colorimetric studies, etc. It is the ability of person to sign or not at their marriage, at the date of that marriage. So we have this information. We count, we identify the proportion of people who were able to sign, okay, and for that, at the marriage contract. What do you observe? It is the indicator. We do not invent it. We would like to have better, of course, but for this period of time, 1786, so it is before, it is the closest to the date of 89 that we found. What do you observe? The fear propagates in the region where the literacy rate was higher, and it is in complete contradiction with what Elster contends. Okay, rumor propagates where the literacy rate, and statistically the difference between the it's a very discriminant factor, this one. So it is I think a very important outcome. Now we're coming to the end. I would like to emphasize what for me is probably the most important thing, the political dimension of the Great Fear. And indeed, and it's not a single opinion, not at all. I think the strength of the paper has been to provide support for the political thesis. So it has a deep political meaning. First, why? Because what was the reaction of people against the Great Fear? They created locally, where the fear was the most important, milice. Okay, and these milice, composed of peasants or people living in the, I would say, bourgeois, with people coming from, to protect the harvest. This is the idea, the original idea. And it was created and emerging at this moment. There were local militias built during the Great Fear. And then it was the first step towards a movement of citizenship, because August 10, so after the end of the Great Fear, these local militia were transformed into the famous National Guard, la Garde Nationale. So it is very interesting to see that, you know, we had something that incarnates democracy. If you think to antique democracy, they armed the citizens. And the French Revolution, at its very beginning, arms also its citizens, because it is threatened at its frontier by England and Austria also. So it was a necessity, but the origin of that was the transformation of this local militia into National Guard. So it is, I think, very, very important. Of course, we observe also that the Great Fear stopped. So an achievement of the Great Fear, this creation of this local militia, became afterwards the famous National Guard, which is the incarnation of a form of democracy. It recalls what was antique democracy. And of course, we find that the Great Fear stopped in August 6, 2 days after the abolition of privilege. And I should have checked this, but I forget to do it. But I read the transcripts of the minutes. I think it is the transcripts of the night of August, the deliberation at the French Assembly. And you have at the beginning of the evening, the Duke, I don't remember his name, a Duke who is the president of the Assembly at this moment, or who invites his colleague to follow the example of what was already done in the countryside, when you have people renouncing to their privilege. It will be, so you see they rely on the experience of what happened previously in the countryside to say, well, it's time now to give an echo to what happens in this countryside and to declare the abolition of privilege. Particularly about this night of August, Elster wrote, and he doesn't mention it in his book, but previously it is an article you've got a version in French also. I don't remember the title. We deal with that. And what does he say? He says, no. It was same mechanism. On the night of August, it was emotion that inflamed the assembly. And that's all. And after, they were confronted to the sentiment of regret. You know, like in behavioral analysis, they say emotion dominates, and then you are confronted to regret. And he explained the night of August in this way. Like he explained the great fear in this way. But in fact, you know, when you have what is the legacy of this night, it is 200 and more years of French democracy, you see. So is it emotional, this? No, it seems to be very rational, and the rationality, but a link between this night of August and the evocation of the events before this night of abolition of privilege. This is a first element in favor of the political meaning of the Great Fear. So probably this is I think, the nicest draft we provide in the article. So look at that. What does it mean? It compares, you had in fact, regarding institutional variables, I mean here, the legal system for land ownership. You had free France. Oh, it's very complicated because I have, myself, I work on that with my colleagues, it's very difficult to remember. You have free France. So one in green, mainly Brittany. But very strange you put this here. I could not explain, it's very particular. The law is nul terre sans seigneur. So please, let me check to my next slide to explain you exactly what it means. Nul, another France. This is Ancien Régime. There is no unification of the law. Oh, there are several systems. Nul à le sans terre. I will tell you what it means. And then another France, the yellow one, nul seigneur sans terre. What is the green one? Mainly Brittany. What does it mean? All this is called alliodality regime. 3 systems of alliodality in France at that time. Nul terre sans seigneur. What does it mean? It means that the feudal rights to the land belong to the original title holder. It is impossible to free the land. Just a parenthesis about that. Some will say, oh, some should, possibly should say, you remember, you do not have, look at the spread of the rumor, you do not have the Great Fear in France. Is it a problem of data? I don't know. Possibly could be linked to the fact that you cannot revolt in this country because you cannot aim to obtain the title. The owner will always remain the first holder. It's like this. So no necessity. You cannot do anything for that. Nul à le sans titre. In red, what does it consist? In this case, in this part of France, it is to the peasant to provide the proof of the holding of property rights. So in this part of France, and I think that in the night of August, the Duke, I don't remember his name, who said we should follow what they did, was inspired by what happened in this part of the territory. Because in this part, it is to the peasant to prove he has the title of property. And what did we do? We can imagine very easily that it's quite easy to get the property title from the noble. You just have to meet him, maybe in a forceful way, I don't know. You can go around him with a community of villagers and to ask him to renounce to his privilege. And this is what happened. This way, in this part of France, it was easy for peasants to provide the proof of their new property obtained by the renunciation to privilege by the nobles. And when you read the transcripts of August 4, the night of August 4, this is the kind of indication you find. Let's follow what happened in the countryside. And they refer to this mainly. And the last part, the yellow one, where, in fact, look at the statistical significance of these three factors. You've got, it's absolutely remarkable. It is, in this part of France, it is to the noble person to provide the evidence of his title. So, if he has it, it is written in what is called livre terrier. Okay. So, it is precisely since it is the nobleman who has the necessity to provide his title, if he refused to give it, the solution observed in this part of France was violence. Livres terriers were burnt with a probability much more important than in other parts of France, because it was the single solution to obtain the renunciation to the property titles. Okay? So, it means two striking things. You imagine that peasants were completely illiterate and didn't know the legislation, the institution. You can see that these 3 France, why were there so many attacks of castle in this part? Why castle burned mainly in this part and not elsewhere? Because of the characteristic of these property rights. You know, it is absolutely all the more striking, and I think we are the first to highlight this aspect of things. Okay, you can reproach to our article not to mobilize the hypotheses of rational expectation of agents. Difficult, as I said at the very beginning, to rely on that to describe a very short moment in time. Okay, but what you observe there is that population of peasants were perfectly aware of the institution legislation. Okay, so they had all the needed information to provoke a change in the world. So they were right; they were not ignorant; they were rational. And this example supports the view that they were rationally informed about the system that prevailed in their region. Okay, so outcome. It is, I think, my final nearly my final slide. The conclusion of this article is that the Great Fear is mainly a rationally motivated episode, politically driven. Okay, I think our arguments support the view that all these factors tend to prove that the Great Fear was a kind of a mobilization against the inequalities of Ancien Régime. And we provide novel evidence of that. Actions against castles and nobles target massively regions which were characterized by a certain regime in terms of property rights, where the aristocracy had to give the proof of their land property by exhibiting these livres terriers. And in this part of the territory, only the peasants have a rational incentive to destroy evidence of the nobility property ownership. And indeed, it is in these regions that we are witnessing their destruction, and even with sometimes burning and pillage of castles. Okay, so sorry. Yes, the yellow part. Yes, absolutely. So ultimately, I think that in this debate about what caused the Great Fear, and should we say that Great Fear was a mark of emotions in the population or not, our outcomes support Lefebvre's view that the Great Fear was before all a political act against feudalism. Okay. And it had a legacy. If it was just emotion, it would have stopped, would have no legacy, but it had legacy. In fact, August 9, abolition of privilege, the birth of modern democracy. And my last slide is to celebrate all the co-authors, co-workers of this paper. So you have Stefano Zapperi, Catherine Laporta, Constant qui est dans la salle, voilà, et puis Cécile Bastidon de tout. Voilà. So thank you.